You're now tuned in to VC Cheat Sheet, the podcast that gives entrepreneurs straight to the point information and behind the scenes access on raising money. Brought to you by the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development at Rutgers University.
You're listening to VC Cheat Sheet, and I'm your host, Melissa S. Jackson. If this is your first time listening, then thank you for tuning in. And if not, thanks for coming back. The goal of the podcast is to help Black and Latino-led startups gain insight into the world of venture and private capital through mentorship and advice. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at TheCued. That's TheCueed. All the links are provided in the show notes at vccheatsheet.com. Now let's get into the show. We all know in life there's levels to everything. So I sat down with Bradley Miles, analyst of the Stripes Group, to talk through the different levels of funding in the VC world. The Stripes Group is not your average VC firm. They exclusively invest in later stage startups. So if you aren't sure what stage you're in, you could be wasting your time reaching out to random VCs. But don't worry, we got you. We'll talk a little bit about the difference between seed stage and late stage startups, and we'll get a sneak peek into his book, Break Into VC. Listen in. Okay, so talk to me about what you're doing now.
Okay, So 2 weeks ago, I published this book, Break Into VC.
2 weeks?
Yeah.
We're like in the launch phase of this book. Okay.
Yeah. So last year, I wrote it last year.
Break Into VC is the name of the book.
Yeah, hashtag Break Into VC.
Hashtag.
So you don't have to say hashtag. I don't know. Usually just say Break Into VC.
Okay.
But yeah, so I spent about 6 months writing it last year, about 3 months editing. And came out 2 weeks ago. And to my surprise, it hit number 1 on Amazon in venture capital.
Congrats.
There was a huge response. And ever since then, I've been touring the country. So there was a moment a week ago, 2 weeks ago, actually, where the book had just come out.
Right.
And it was number 1. And I was speaking at the college I just graduated from, Columbia, hosted by an organization that I started, Columbia Venture Partners.
Yes.
And it was just like a moment from up above. So I really appreciated that. And the book launched 2 weeks ago, became a bestseller, and just started touring. So I've spoke at Columbia, Wharton, Brown University, Harvard. And most importantly, really just got a chance to get on the phone with readers from all over the world, Middle East, Africa, Cambodia, high school students, people that are senior executives at IBM. Everyone's sort of curious on understanding the fundamentals of venture capital.
Right.
And I'm more than happy to get on the phone with them. And, for any of your listeners, if you guys simply just purchase the book, I think right now, I upped the price a little bit. So it used to be 99 cents. Now it's like $2.99. But if anyone...
You can splurge. $2.99 is a splurge. But I think they could do it.
So yeah, if anyone's interested in getting the book and learning about sort of the path to think like an investor, which just means learning how to perhaps raise capital or pursue a career in venture capital.
Right.
More than happy to hop on the phone for like a 20-minute Skype session. If, they just email me, Bradley at Break Into VC. So I've been doing about 30 or 40 of those, and I try and do about like 10 a week.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll make sure that, we'll include that in the notes. So let's break into how you got the inspiration to put together Break Into VC.
Sure.
So, what kind of birthed this book? And then let's talk a little bit about the book itself, because you think in the book, you talk a little bit about the various levels to private capital.
Yeah.
So let's start with, how this all kind of manifested itself.
Yeah. So like I said, I transferred to Columbia from a community college, which had sort of its own stigma. But I think going in, I was like, hey, I want to work in venture capital. And everyone, 100% of the people were just like, well, first you need to work at Wall Street for 3 years. And then you need to do this for another 3 years. Then you need to go to this fancy business school. And then maybe you can get an interview. So I started going down that path. And the first thing they said is you have to work in investment banking. So, I typed in how to get into investment banking and talked to some friends. And turns out there was a guide out there called Wall Street Oasis. There's another guide called Mergers and Inquisitions. These are like blogs to talk about how to do it. So I did it. I did banking for a summer and grueling 120-hour weeks and 4 a.m. nights. That didn't bother me much. What really bothered me was the culture. So analysts would sort of, just sort of do their work. And then once the partners would leave, it was almost as if everyone sort of didn't like their job. They were kind of putting on a mask. And for me, that's when I realized like culture was really important for me.
Yeah.
Just sort of understanding that I want to be in a place where everyone else is really, really happy.
Right. And what do you think kind of contributed to the negative culture, right?
It was probably, I don't want to get too into it because everyone knows where I work.
Okay. We can skip over that question.
No. It's fine. It's just, it's the culture of banking in general. It's very grueling. They very much need like warm bodies to type as fast as they can in Microsoft Excel.
Okay.
But what you learn is incredible. You really come out a machine. You really come out knowing everything about valuation.
Right.
I worked on deals that were like Madison Square Garden split into 2 public companies, like the real estate and the channel. And I worked on that deal. I was one of the lead people that was sort of crunching numbers on it. So I learned a ton, but I turned it down. And, I decided to sort of, I didn't have any leads, but I really wanted to work in venture capital. So I just hustled and I cold emailed 60 VCs and one responded, a company called Next Gen Angels. Now they're called Next Gen Venture Partners. They've since raised over $15 million. And my job then was to source people. So I sourced high net worth individuals, angel investors, C-suite level startup guys, and I tried to convince them to join Next Gen Angels so they could have a New York chapter. And now they have about 50 members. So a lot of that was me sourcing them. And around that time, I got really comfortable talking with investors, realizing, hey, these are just humans. These are just people.
Right.
And through that, I learned how to source companies. I learned how to, evaluate markets. I learned all these things that a lot of my friends weren't learning. And I realized eventually, there was no guide out there. There was no Wall Street Oasis. There was no mergers and acquisitions guide. And I was really searching for one. So, when push comes to shove, I realized...
Go ahead and create your own opportunity and create the book.
Yeah, originally I thought of it as sort of, a problem. But then I really thought about it for a long time and I realized this is a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
And I just went from there.
Yeah. So that's actually why we have you here today, to really break down, I feel like in tech, just in general, there are all these key buzzwords. People hear seed funding and, it can mean various things to different people. So let's kind of start at the bare bones, how you can raise money for your venture. So let's just assume I am a founder of a tech company. Where do I start? Very basic.
So do you have
friends
a team?
And family?
Do you have a product? Like where are we?
Yeah. So, do you think it would necessarily matter if I have a team or I don't? Because I have a lot of people who will come to us, who will say, or come to me and say, I've got a great idea. I've got an MVP. I've got a product. I was able to get that far.
MVP meaning minimum viable
product, okay. Right? So, what's the option for them at that stage?
Wow, that's a really good question. So if you're a first-time entrepreneur, you're going to need to prove yourself to the market, I'll say, or to, private investors. So the first thing you need to do is just develop a really strong team.
Okay.
If you don't code, I'd recommend, I have a friend named Amos Schur. He runs, I hope I'm saying his last name right, it's SCHORR. And he runs a group called ProtoHack. And ProtoHack is a hackathon for people that don't code. So a lot of people are looking for coders to sort of start their project. And it's great if you find one. But if you just have no connections with people that program whatsoever, you could actually jump into a ProtoHack hackathon and sort of iterate your idea from the business stage.
Right.
And there's also a ton of programs to learn how to code as well, and also sort of co-founder dating programs where you could meet developers. So once you have a strong team of, maybe perhaps you're a business leader, maybe you are a developer, then you need to start sort of building a pitch deck. And your pitch deck should focus on, the problem in the market that you're trying to solve, how you're going to solve it, and how you're uniquely positioned to sort of, stand out from the competition.
Right. Okay. So let's actually kind kind of assume that I've gone through that program and I've got my MVP. Am I ready for seed funding? Am I ready for Series A funding? Can I go for crowdfunding options? I mean, where are my options there? Or let's actually start talking about what is crowdfunding.
Yeah. So crowdfunding. So some crowdfunding platforms are Indiegogo,
Right.
Kickstarter, and these are platforms essentially where you can have an idea. You can have a product. You can almost sort of launch pre-product, and essentially put your product on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, and raise money for your project. From people like you and me, instead of going out and looking for, VCs from Andreessen Horowitz or any of these venture firms, folks like you and me could donate or invest money in the project. Since in the past year or so, so there's Obama era regulation called the Jobs Act that just went into effect, and now people like you and me can invest up to $2,000 a year in startups on platforms like Indiegogo and Kickstarter. So that's a relatively new thing. But in general, these places, crowdfunding, it's a way for people like you and me to essentially just go out there and raise money for our projects. I have friends that have raised upwards of $250,000, on Kickstarter and Indiegogo.
So if I do a crowdfunding platform on, let's say, Indiegogo, am I responsible to the people who've contributed to my crowdfund? Any type of equity, or how does that work?
Yeah,
Is it safe?
there's been a lot of hiccups in crowdfunding. You're not necessarily legally responsible to deliver maybe like a founder dinner or something if someone donates. Actually, candidly, I have friends that didn't follow through on some of their pledges, but the regulation's kind of gray right now, since it's so new, relating to sort of equity, and there are actually some crowdfunding platforms that are sort of staying away from it. But I think that's sort of to be continued in terms of what's sort of obligatory for investors and founders to sort of follow through with.
Okay. Can you talk me through seed funding? I get a lot of people who will come and say, I'm just looking for seed funding. And that can be anything from maybe $1,000 up to, $50,000, right?
Yeah.
So talk me through seed funding.
Sure. So I would just say for the listeners out there that are in college or in business school, or, at most, maybe 2 years out of school, there's so much money for students that want to sort of, start companies. A lot of institutions have funding just for students, and business accelerators, business incubators. There's also groups like Dorm Room Fund, Contrary Capital, Rough Draft Ventures, and these are groups run by students that have venture capital money to invest in the student ecosystem. One thing I did at Columbia was I started sort of an education curriculum called Columbia Venture Partners that really focused on sort of students, learning about venture capital. But additionally, there's a lot of programs at schools that sort of revolve around business accelerators, where they sort of deploy seed capital to students. But in general, seed capital is just,
So not all the teams that come to us are students too. So
Okay, yeah.
We actually have a lot of, or the program that we're working on isn't geared specifically towards students. If students want to apply, definitely we encourage them to. But, we're really talking to just the run of the mill, right? Quote unquote. Tech startup founder who's Black and Latino.
Sure. So even before seed, there's a small little known secret called, friends and family round. Or FF round. And at that round, you're going around to, maybe your uncle who has some money, or a relative or a friend of the family that really just believes in you, can help you out.
Right.
You got to be a little wary, because you got to think about, 5-10 years down the line, if your crazy uncle wasn't a high net worth individual, or someone that sort of, makes over $150,000 and he wants to invest in your startup. My company as a VC may have some qualms with investing in you. So, if you have an uncle that's willing to give you $5,000, just sort of think about that. You can't really accept everyone's money all the time, but it is understandable that you do need a place to start in the beginning.
Okay.
So that's the friends and family round, and like you said, the seed round can be anywhere from $1,000 or $2,000 all the way up to I've seen seed rounds as high as maybe $750,000 or $1 million.
So how would one know the difference? And if I'm approaching either an angel or a VC, is there a distinction? Is there a red flag that somebody will say like, okay, I only invest in, very small $1,000 pop type deals, or, how would I know the difference in the seed stage?
Yeah, so most investors have a range that they like to invest in. Something you could always do is go to crunchbase.com.
Okay.
So, for instance, I'm going to work for a firm called Stripes Group.
Okay.
And if you go to Stripes Group, if you type in Stripes Group on Crunchbase, you can see that, the lowest Stripes will invest is $15 million and the highest they'll invest is $60 million. So just like that, there's angel investors on Crunchbase, and you can sort of see what range they'll like to invest in.
Right.
And also, early stage venture capitalists as well. So you can type in the name of their firm and sort of see the range. And usually they have sort of an investment sort of thesis or page where they'll say, hey, we're an early stage firm. We do investments from, $10,000 to, maybe $100,000.
So it's really about doing your research on who you're asking money from.
And then even before that, a lot of incubators and accelerators do seed funding as well. So you mentioned sort of angel investors; those come in sort of the early stage when you just start to maybe start a company from the ether, and it's just you and me. That hey, let's start a company stage.
Okay.
A lot of sort of incubators and accelerators are around sort of for that time. I think the most popular ones, so sort of, I guess I hate to go tiers here, but maybe the A-level incubators and accelerators are, Y Combinator, Techstars. But there's so many out there that are willing to help. And really just, Googling around, accelerators or incubators in your area, it's great to sort of have that network and share ideas. And you'll find that it'll really help your startup blossom and grow over time.
Right. So can we talk a little bit about what growth funding is? I've heard that term thrown around, but I'm not necessarily sure, is that going from friends and family to crowdfunding? Is that going from C to A? What is growth funding?
Yeah, so I think it's best to talk about that through a narrative. So, if you and me are at that, hey, let's start a company stage, let's say maybe we did Techstars, right? Okay. And so, we gave a certain amount of equity. Techstars is an incubator accelerator. So we gave a certain amount of equity. We gave away a certain amount of equity for capital. Mm-hmm. And then let's say maybe we had a few angel investors along the way. So at that point, we have a product, and then we went through early stage venture capital. So at that stage, we've developed the product. We're just starting to attract customers. We're just starting to sort of build on revenue. And at that point, the venture capital, you go from seed to Series A and Series B. Mm-hmm. And, Series A and Series B, usually it's around anywhere from, $1 million to a little bit south of 15 million. So you'd be really surprised. I've talked with a lot of companies that have raised over $10 million and don't have a CFO or, aren't sure if their business is going to be around in a few months. A lot of crazy things happen just because your company has 10 million in revenue or has raised 10 million. It doesn't mean you've solved all the problems in the world with your business. Mm-hmm. But once you pass that threshold, once you've raised $10 million or, have $10 million in revenue,
right?
You sort of enter a stage where you need to be attractive to the markets later on. And when I say markets, I just mean potentially you can IPO or do an initial public offering like we saw Snapchat do, or maybe you're an attractive company to, someone like Walmart, that bought Jet last year for a lot of money. So those are the two ways venture capital firms exit their money. So when you talk about growth equity, it's just another term for late stage investing. And late stage meaning not early stage. Not early stage meaning over $15 million or Series C, Series D. And that's what the firm I'm going to actually does. So they do a ton of late stage investing for companies like Blue Apron Group. It's one of the investments, Pond5, Reformation.
Okay. So if you could highlight maybe like the top 2-3 things that I or anyone reading your book break into VC would get, what do you think, your top 3 takeaways would be?
Yeah, so I've been lecturing around the country. This week I lectured at University of South Carolina, Brown University, Harvard. Anyone listening, if you're in California, next week I'm going to be at USC, UCLA, Berkeley, and Stanford. What I really talk about is brand building, right? Okay. So if you were to Google my name and Bitcoin, a ton of articles would come up.
Yes, it did.
So last year, I got super interested in Bitcoin. Okay. And I worked for a company called CoinDesk. Mm-hmm. CoinDesk is sort of like call it maybe the New York Times of Bitcoin. So anything you want to know, anyone just goes to CoinDesk. They didn't have a research arm. So CoinDesk at that point was basically a blog, and they would say the price of Bitcoin is this. This happened today. That happened today. But they had all this data, right? They had all these patent informations, funding levels. So I came in and I was actually able to head their research team as a senior at Columbia. And I developed something called the State of Blockchain, which was just a quarterly update of trends, data, general insights in the industry. So you'd look back and you'd see how Bitcoin was performing, how the latest startups were doing, any updates on regulation. So outside of the book, I sort of became the blockchain guy or the Bitcoin guy. Like earlier this week on Monday, I just lectured in South Carolina for a blockchain class, and I have entrepreneurs reaching out to me, and I talk to investors about blockchain a lot. So in general, if you're into venture capital or you're into startups, something really great that you can do is you don't need a CoinDesk. You can just publish a lot of this stuff on Medium and use that as your platform and sort of be the X guy, the drone guy, the AI guy. And it's very easy to do. I walk through in the book, I walk through how to pitch a company. Mm-hmm. And if you just use that framework, so you start with the market, you start with the level of funding, and then you deep dive into the company, you Google around. So maybe you're looking at a drone company, you type in, this drone company hired this person, they announced this deal. You'll actually be able to come up with a pretty comprehensive analysis of a business. Mm-hmm. And that's really what, VCs do every Monday or Tuesday morning. They talk about the latest businesses. Yeah. So you putting that stuff on Medium for free really builds value. I'd say that's probably the most important topic in the book. And then some key terms as well that you should know to quote unquote speak VC.
Right. And is this intended for people who are looking for VC capital or people who are looking to become VCs themselves?
Both. Yeah. Okay. So what's really important is learning how to think like an investor. So I've talked with entrepreneurs who have said this book was extremely helpful. I've talked with C-level executives at startups, even at enterprise companies like IBM, and I've talked with college and business school students as well. And the whole idea of the book, is to sort of develop the mindset of an investor. Mm-hmm. So if you and me start a company and we know how to speak like investors and we know all the terminology that comes into investing, we're going to be that much better on a phone call. If you come to me and you know your customer acquisition cost, your customer lifetime value, your churn rate and your burn rate, you understand sort of these key terms, you're really going to wow investors. And even if they don't invest, that's going to be a lasting relationship for like 3-4 years. A lot of people don't realize that. Like, just because you get a no doesn't mean it's the end of the relationship. As long as you impress one of these guys, the relationship lasts for a really long time. And, there's plenty of investors that have turned down people multiple times just because it wasn't the right company. They're just looking for, the right person. And once they find them, they're, definitely willing to invest eventually.
So you talk about knowing the right lingo. For investors of color, particularly Black and Latino founders, all too often, I think the lingo is the missing piece, right? Because they understand the business. They've been, in their field for X amount of years. They've been working on their projects or their products for X amount of years. But when it comes to speaking to investors, they're not sure what they did wrong, or they're not sure if they were as clear, as effective. So from your vantage point, being on the other side, how or what advice would you give to founders of color specifically when it comes to talking to angels, VCs?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So you mentioned just knowing the lingo and the terms. Mm-hmm. I would say that's pretty crucial. So if you have a tech business, know what gross margins are. So gross margins are, so if you look at an income statement, the top line of the income statement is revenue. And then you subtract the direct costs that go into producing that revenue. And then you have gross profit.
Okay.
And gross margins is the ratio between gross profit and revenue. So you should understand that typical gross margins for a tech business are like 75 or 85%. Right. So when a VC asks, hey, what's your gross margins? You should sort of be able to benchmark your gross margins and understand that for tech companies, it's sort of that high compared to a company like Deloitte or Accenture, which, Deloitte or Accenture, their gross margins are around 25% because the direct costs are people. They're hiring a lot of people and they're scaling people. But with a tech company, you're scaling technology. So those direct costs are hosting, infrastructure. So that's GoDaddy. That's all this. That's AWS. That's all these services. But with Deloitte, those costs are like, $100,000 to $200,000 to pay these people. So that's why VCs generally invest in tech companies and not, consulting companies.
Okay, understood. Now, outside of your book, where can I go to learn more about venture capitalism, learn more about investments, learn more about, funding in general for my tech business?
Yeah, so I honestly didn't have too much. So I started my own community. So I was at Columbia and there wasn't a community. I started Columbia Venture Partners and I taught students everything I knew about venture capital at the time, which ended up being the early chapters of the book. What is venture capital? What is growth equity, which we went over? How to pitch a company, which is in the book. And then through that, I really built a strong community. And a lot of people don't realize that that gives you an excuse to run around and, talk to partners, talk to VCs all over the country, and then say, hey, you've built this community. Do you want to come and speak? By the way, I have these brilliant, students that, would love to, work for you and learn from you. So that's generally how I started. And then through that, I really just scoured the internet. There was really no guide on this is venture capital. This is how to invest. This is how to do X or Y. So I kind of wrote it, break into VC. Okay. But aside from my book, I would say one of the most helpful things is just going to meetups. If you can.
Exposure is really important.
Yeah, exposure. If you can, I would say do things like ProtoHack where, if you don't code, do things like ProtoHack where you could sort of go to a hackathon and just talk about your ideas with people. So a colleague of mine, Ariel Lopez, she has a group called 2020 Shift, where she sort of does, sort of like office walks or does a lot of recruiting as well. She has a great blog. I used to write for another blog called People of Color in Tech. So they do a series of interviews, with folks in the industry, so you could sort of get a case study or an idea of how they did it. Okay. So there's a lot of resources out there. I would say, People of Color in Tech is great. 2020 Shift. And if you're interested in the fundamentals of, venture capital, Break Into VC is great as well. And if anyone picks it up, you could email Bradley at Break Into VC and I'll happily hop on a 20-minute Skype call with you. Perfect. 20 or 30 minutes.
I like that. And we're going to hold you to it.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to us on iTunes so you can stay up to date on new episodes featuring more insiders. Have any questions? Leave us a comment on this episode at vccheatsheet.com. Or you can tweet us at TheCued, that's TheCueed. Until next time, be great, and it's a wrap.